The baby wouldn't stop screaming. Wade Turner pressed his palms against his ears, but nothing could silence the sound. Not the howling wind, not his own ragged breathing, not even the memory of his wife's last words. 3 days. 3 days since Clara died in his arms, and now their son was dying too. The cabin reeked of sour milk and desperation. Wade's hands shook as he stared at the rifle above the mantel, then at the tiny writhing body in the cradle. Before we begin this journey through the Wyoming winter of 1881, please subscribe to our channel and stay with us until the very end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's step into Wade Turner's darkest hour. Wade's fingers fumbled with the tin of condensed milk. Half of it splashed across the table, pooling in the cracks between boards he'd meant to fix last summer. His son's cries had gone hoarse, a wet rattling sound that made Wade think of drowning. Come on. He dipped a clean rag into what remained. Please. The baby latched on for maybe 3 seconds. Then he spit it out. His face purple, his whole body rigid with hunger. Wade threw the rag. It hit the cold stove and slid to the floor, leaving a white streak across the soot. I don't know what to do. His voice cracked on the last word. Clara. I don't. But Clara was in the frozen ground behind the barn, wrapped in her wedding quilt, because Wade couldn't afford a coffin. The ground had been so hard he'd broken 2 shovels getting deep enough. His hands were still bandaged, the blisters weeping through the cloth. The baby screamed again. Wade picked him up, bouncing the way Clara used to, but the boy only cried harder. Wade could feel every rib through the thin nightshirt. Could see the fontanelle pulsing too fast in the baby's skull. Just a little, Wade whispered against his son's head. Just enough to live. But the baby only screamed. The Hendersons lived 3 miles north. Wade rode through yesterday's snow, with his son wrapped inside his coat, feeling the tiny body shaking against his chest. Margaret Henderson answered on the 3rd knock. Her own baby was on her hip, maybe 4 months old, fat and healthy. Milk stained the front of her dress. Wade. She didn't open the door wider. I heard about Clara. I'm so sorry. I need milk, Margaret. Please, just a little. She looked down at the bundle against his chest. Wade pulled the blanket back so she could see his son's gray face, the sunken eyes. Oh, Wade. Her voice went soft. I wish I could, but he's dying. I know, but John says. She glanced over her shoulder. I've barely got enough for my own, you understand? No one has to know, just enough to. John says no. She started closing the door. I'm sorry. Wade shoved his boot in the gap. Margaret, please. He's 3 days old. He hasn't done anything wrong. Move your foot, Wade. Just 1 bottle. That's all I'm asking. I said move your foot. Her voice hardened. This isn't my problem. The door slammed. Wade heard the lock click, then John Henderson's voice inside. He's still out there. Wade stood on that porch for a full minute, his son screaming in his arms, before he turned and walked back to his horse. The Colemans said their milk had dried up. The widow Price said her arthritis was too bad to help. Mrs. Chen, who'd delivered half the babies in the territory, including Wade's son, stood in her doorway and shook her head. I'm too old, she said. My milk's been gone 20 years. Do you know anyone? Anyone at all? The women with babies, they all got their own to feed. She looked at the bundle in his arms. You might try the Sullivans. Mary just had twins. Maybe she's got extra. But Mary Sullivan took one look at Wade and shut the door without a word. By sunset, Wade had been to 9 houses. 9 doors had closed in his face. He rode home in the dark, his son's cries getting weaker with every mile. The baby would scream for a minute, then go silent for 2, then scream again. Each silence lasted longer than the one before. Wade thought about just riding. just pointing his horse west and riding until they both froze, or the baby stopped breathing, whichever came first. At least then he wouldn't have to watch. Instead, he went home. He took a piece of charcoal and a plank of wood from the barn and wrote in shaking letters, "Need mother's milk, please." He nailed it to the gatepost at the end of the long drive, where anyone passing on the ridge road might see it. Then he carried his dying son inside and waited for nobody to come. Midnight came. The fire was dying. Wade hadn't had the strength to bring in more wood, and the cold was creeping through the walls. His son lay against his chest, barely moving now. The crying had stopped an hour ago. That was worse than the screaming. Wade looked at the rifle above the mantel. One bullet would end this. One bullet and he wouldn't have to feel his son go cold in his arms. Wouldn't have to dig another grave in the frozen ground. He stood up, crossed the room, put his hand on the rifle. Then he heard footsteps outside. His head jerked toward the door. For one wild, stupid second, he thought it was Clara, that she'd come back, that this was all a nightmare, that he'd wake up and she'd be in their bed, her hand on her swollen belly, laughing at him for falling asleep in the chair. But when he yanked the door open, he found someone else. A woman stood on his porch covered in snow. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, her lips blue with cold. She wore a thin coat and carried a covered tin pail. That was all. Wade stared. She stared back, her eyes dropping to the baby in his arms. "I have milk," she said. Her voice was rough, unused. Wade's throat closed. He couldn't speak. "May I?" She gestured toward the baby. He nodded, stepped aside. She walked past him into the cabin, bringing the smell of snow and pine soap. She set the tin pail on the table and held out her arms. Wade looked down at his son. The baby's skin was gray, his lips cracked. His chest barely moved. He handed him over. She took him gently, one hand cradling his head, and carried him to the rocking chair. She sat down and began unbuttoning her coat. Wade turned away, his face burning. "You can look," she said. "I don't care." He kept his back turned anyway, listened to the rustle of fabric, the soft adjusting sounds. Then, after a moment that stretched like years, silence. His son had stopped crying. Wade's knees buckled. He grabbed the table edge, his whole body shaking. He waited for the crying to start again, for this to be another false hope, another cruel trick. But the silence held. He heard soft suckling, a tiny sigh of contentment. He turned around. The woman sat in Clara's chair, his son in her arms, nursing. The firelight caught the tears on her cheeks, made them shine like broken glass. Her lips moved silently, praying maybe, or talking to the baby. Wade couldn't tell which. After a few minutes, the baby's eyes started to close. His little fists unclenched. His breathing evened out into something that sounded like sleep instead of dying. The woman winced as she shifted him to the other side. "Are you hurt?" Wade managed. "No, just, it's been a while." "Since you nursed?" She nodded, not looking at him. Wade wanted to ask more. Who was she? Where was her child? Why had she walked through a blizzard to feed a stranger's baby? But something in her face stopped him, a kind of pain so deep it had roots. He grabbed the tin pail she'd brought instead. Fresh milk, still warm somehow. "I can heat this," he said. "For next time. How much do I give him?" 2 ounces every 2 hours at first. His stomach's been empty too long. Too much too fast will make him sick." "Right." Wade ladled some into a small pot and hung it over what remained of the fire. "I'm Wade, Wade Turner." The woman was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. "Mera," she said finally. "Mera Delaney." "You live nearby." Over the ridge, the old Pruitt place. Wade knew it. A rundown cabin that had been empty for years. He'd heard someone moved in last fall, but he'd been too busy with Clara's pregnancy to pay attention. "You came all this way in the storm," he said. "I heard him crying." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Days now. I couldn't listen anymore." The baby had fallen asleep, his mouth still against her breast milk, dribbling down his chin. Mera wiped it away with her thumb, so tender it made Wade's chest ache. "He's done," she said. Wade took his son carefully. The baby felt heavier, somehow warmer. His face was peaceful. Wade laid him in the cradle and covered him with a blanket, watching the tiny chest rise and fall in a rhythm that looked like life. When he turned back, Mera was buttoning her coat eyes on the floor. "You'll need to feed him again in 2 hours," she said. "Use the milk I brought. Warm it, but not too hot. Test it on your wrist first." "Wait." Wade moved between her and the door. "You can't go back out in this." "I'll be fine. You'll freeze. I know the way." "Lady Mera, please, stay until morning. You can have the bed. I'll sleep out here." "No." "Then let me at least—" "I said no." Her voice went sharp. "I did what I came to do. Your boy will live now. That's enough." She tried to push past him. Wade caught her arm. She flinched so hard he dropped it immediately. "I'm sorry," he said. Why did you come?" "Really?" Mera's jaw worked. Her hands clenched. "Because I know what it's like," she said finally. "To hold a dying baby. To beg God for help that never comes. I know what that feels like, and I couldn't let it happen again. Not when I could stop it." The pieces fell into place. The milk, the way she'd held his son, the pain carved into her face. "You had a child," Wade said softly. Mera's face crumpled. She covered her mouth, turned away. "I'm sorry," Wade said. "Don't." She wiped her eyes roughly. "Everyone says that. It doesn't help." "Then what can I do?" "Let me leave." Wade wanted to argue, wanted to make her stay where it was warm, where she'd be safe. But he recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror every morning since Clara died. "The milk will last 2 days if you keep it cold," Mera said, pulling herself together. "After that, you'll need more. I can bring it. Every other day." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She met his eyes for the first time. Hers were dark brown, nearly black in the firelight. "That baby needs to eat, and you need to sleep. I'll come back." "Why?" The question hung between them like smoke. "Because no one came for me," Mera said. "When my son was dying, I begged. I went to every door in town, and every door closed in my face, just like they did to you today." Wade thought of Margaret Henderson, of Mary Sullivan, of all the people who'd turned him away. "I'll pay you," he said. "Whatever you need. I don't want your money." She pulled her coat tighter. "I just want—" She stopped, shook her head. "What?" Wade pressed. "Nothing. Doesn't matter." She moved to the door. "I'll be back day after tomorrow. Keep him warm. Don't overfeed him. If he gets a fever, send for Dr. Morrison." "Morrison's 3 days from here." "Then pray he doesn't get a fever." She was out the door before Wade could respond, disappearing into the white wall of storm. He stood in the doorway watching until he couldn't see her anymore, the cold air biting his face raw. When he finally closed the door, the cabin felt emptier than before, but his son was sleeping. Actually, sleeping, his tiny snores filling the silence where screaming used to be. Wade sank into the rocking chair and let himself cry for the first time since Clara died. 2 days passed, like fever dreams. Wade fed his son every 2 hours, measuring the milk, carefully testing it on his wrist. The baby took it greedily, his color improving with each feeding. By the second day, he was crying with real strength. Not dying sounds, but healthy, angry hunger. Wade talked to him while he fed him. Told him about Clara, about how she'd loved him before he was born. About the ranch, the horses they'd raise someday. About anything to fill the silence. He also thought about Mera Delaney. She'd walked through a blizzard to save his son. A woman he'd never met who owed him nothing. He remembered the tears on her face, the pain in her voice. "Because no one came for me." Wade went to the window every few hours, looking toward the ridge where she lived. The storm had passed, leaving everything buried under 2 feet of snow. He could barely see the trees through the white. On the evening of the second day, just as the sun was setting, he saw her coming. She picked her way through the snow, carrying 2 tin pails. Wade grabbed his coat and boots and went out to meet her. "Let me help," he called. Mera looked up, startled. "You shouldn't be out here. The baby?" "He's sleeping. He's fine." Wade took one of the pails. It was heavy, full of milk. "How far did you walk?" "Not far." "That's a lie." She almost smiled. "Maybe." They walked back together in silence. Wade kept glancing at her. She looked tired, her face pale, her coat torn at the shoulder. But she walked with her back straight, her chin up. Inside, Wade set the pails on the table and stirred the fire back to life. Mera stood by the door, not taking off her coat. "He's doing well?" she asked. "See for yourself." She hesitated, then moved to the cradle. Wade watched her face soften as she looked down at his son sleeping peacefully, now his cheeks pink and full. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Thanks to you." She shook her head. "I just gave him milk. You're the one keeping him alive." "I wouldn't have had the chance if you hadn't come." She didn't answer, just kept looking at the baby, her fingers gripping the cradle edge. "Have you eaten?" Wade asked. "I'm fine." "That's another lie." He moved to the stove. "Sit. I've got stew from yesterday." "I need to get back." "Mera." Wade turned to face her. "Please. You walked all this way. Let me give you a hot meal." She looked at him for a long moment, then slowly unbuttoned her coat and sat at the table. Wade ladled stew into a bowl and set it in front of her with a hunk of bread. She ate like she was starving, trying to hide it, small bites, slow chewing. But Wade saw her hands shake, saw the way she broke off pieces of bread and ate them while waiting for the stew to cool. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked, sitting across from her. "This morning." "The last real meal." Her jaw tightened. "Few days." "You're giving away your milk but not feeding yourself." "I don't need much." "That's stupid," Wade said. Her head snapped up. "Excuse me. You heard me. You can't feed my son if you're half-starved." He pushed the rest of the loaf toward her. "Eat." For a second, he thought she'd throw it at him. Then her shoulders sagged and she picked it up. "I've got dried venison," Wade continued. "Canned vegetables, flour sugar coffee. You're taking some home." "I don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's payment." He leaned forward. "You won't take money, fine. But you can't feed my boy if you're too weak to walk over here, so you're taking food. That's the deal." Mera stared at him. Then, to his surprise, she laughed, short and bitter, but still a laugh. "You're stubborn," she said. "Pot kettle." Wade stood and started gathering supplies: venison, canned beans, a small bag of coffee. "How's your firewood situation?" "I have enough." "Another lie. I'm bringing you a cord tomorrow." Wade. "Don't argue with me, Mera. You saved my son's life. I can bring you firewood." She opened her mouth, closed it, nodded. Wade saw her blink rapidly. They sat in silence after that, just the crackling fire and the baby's soft breathing. Wade found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. The way she held her spoon. The way she glanced at the cradle every few seconds. The way she seemed to be bracing against some invisible weight. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "You can ask." "Your son. What was his name?" Mera's hand froze halfway to her mouth. For a long time she didn't speak. "Thomas," she said finally. "Thomas." Wade repeated it softly. "That's a good name." He never got to hear it. Her voice broke. "He died before I could tell him." Wade wanted to say something comforting, but he remembered. Everyone says that, and it doesn't help. So he just nodded. "How old?" he asked. 3 days. The same age Wade's son had been when Mera first came. No wonder she'd heard the crying and couldn't stand it. "What happened?" Wade asked gently. Mera set down her spoon. Her hands trembled. "He couldn't breathe right. From the moment he was born, he couldn't." She swallowed hard. The midwife said his lungs weren't formed proper. Said there was nothing to do but wait, so I held him. For 3 days I held him and tried to feed him, but he couldn't swallow, couldn't cry. Just these little gasping sounds. She wiped her eyes. On the 3rd morning, he stopped gasping. Wade's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I buried him behind my cabin. There's a willow tree there." She looked up at him, her eyes red. "I thought he'd like the willow, the way it moves in the wind, like dancing." "I'm sure he would." She laughed that bitter laugh. "You can't be sure of anything with babies. That's what makes it so—" She stopped. "So impossible," Wade finished. "Yes." They looked at each other across the table. Two people who'd lost everything held together by a dying fire and a sleeping baby who didn't know how many people had fought to keep him alive. "Clara," Wade said. "My wife. She died 3 days after he was born, childbed fever. I'm sorry." "See, doesn't help." Mera almost smiled. "No, it doesn't." But somehow sitting there with someone who understood Wade felt a little less alone. When Mera stood to leave, Wade packed up the food he'd gathered and added extra coffee. A jar of preserved peaches and a wool scarf from the chest at the foot of the bed. "I can't take all this," Mera protested. "You can and you will." Wade pressed the bundle into her arms. "And I'm serious about the firewood. Tomorrow afternoon." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." He opened the door. "Same time day after tomorrow. For the milk." "Yes." She was halfway down the porch steps when Wade called after her. "Mera." She turned. "Thank you. Not just for the milk. For everything." She nodded once, then disappeared into the darkness, the bundle clutched against her chest. Wade stood in the doorway until he couldn't see her anymore. His son was alive, and tomorrow, Mera would come back. For now, that was enough. No. The next 2 weeks fell into rhythm. Mera came every other day with milk, always at dusk. She never stayed longer than it took to check the baby and accept whatever food Wade insisted she take. He brought her firewood like he'd promised. Fixed the hole in her roof. Replaced her broken window with spare glass from his barn. She never asked him to do these things. He just did them. In return, she started staying longer. 10 minutes became 20. 20 became an hour. She'd sit in Clara's rocking chair while Wade heated the baby's milk, and they'd talk about small things, the weather, the ranch cattle prices in Cheyenne. They didn't talk about Clara or Thomas. That grief was still too raw. But slowly, something changed. Wade started looking forward to her visits. Started listening for her footsteps. The cabin felt less empty when she was there, less full of ghosts. And Mera, she started to smile sometimes. Small smiles that disappeared almost as soon as they appeared, but they were there. The baby thrived. By the end of the 2nd week, he doubled in weight, his eyes bright and alert. Wade had taken to calling him Little Man. "You should name him," Mera said one evening, watching Wade feed the baby. "I know. Clara and I had a list, but none of them feel right now." "What was on the list?" "James, William, Robert." He made a face. "She wanted Samuel after her father." "And you?" "I wanted something less common, something that means something." Mera tilted her head, studying the baby. "He looks like a fighter." "He is that." "Then name him something strong, something that says he survived." Wade thought about it. "Phoenix, like the bird that rises from ashes." "That's not a Christian name." "I don't care." Wade looked down at his son. "Phoenix Turner. What do you think, little man?" The baby yawned. "I think that's a yes," Mera said, and for the first time her smile reached her eyes. That night after Mera left, Wade sat in the rocking chair with Phoenix in his arms and whispered the name over and over. He was still sitting there when he heard the knock. Wade frowned. Mera had left an hour ago. Nobody else came by this late. He laid Phoenix in the cradle and opened the door. Father O'Connell stood on the porch, his collar bright white in the moonlight. "Mr. Turner," he said, "we need to talk about the woman who's been visiting you." Wade's stomach dropped. "What about her?" "May I come in?" Wade didn't move. "Say what you came to say." O'Connell's lips thinned. "Fine. The whole ridge is talking, Mr. Turner. A woman. Alone. Coming here after dark. You know what people are saying. I don't care what people say. You should, especially about her." O'Connell's eyes narrowed. "Do you even know who she is, where her husband is?" "She's helping me feed my son. She's a scandal waiting to destroy you." The priest stepped closer. "That woman had a child out of wedlock, Mr. Turner. No husband, no family. Just a bastard baby that died, thank God, before it could." Wade's fist hit O'Connell's jaw before he knew he was swinging. The priest stumbled backward, catching himself on the porch railing. He touched his lip, his fingers coming away bloody. "Get off my land," Wade said quietly. "You're making a mistake. I said, get off my land." O'Connell straightened his eyes hard. "The church elders will hear about this. About her. About what's happening here. If you value your soul, Mr. Turner, you'll send that woman away and find a proper Christian woman to help you. Otherwise what? Otherwise you'll find yourself very alone in this territory. No one will trade with you. No one will help you. And when winter comes again, you and that baby will freeze." O'Connell smiled coldly. "Think about that." He walked down the steps and mounted his horse, riding off into the darkness. Wade stood on the porch, his knuckles throbbing, his heart pounding. Behind him, Phoenix started to cry. Wade closed the door and picked up his son, holding him close. "It's okay," he whispered. "We're okay." But he wasn't sure that was true anymore. Wade didn't sleep that night. He sat in the rocking chair with Phoenix in his arms, watching the door like O'Connell might come back with a mob. His knuckles had swollen where they'd connected with the priest's jaw, but the pain felt distant, unimportant. What mattered was what O'Connell had said about Mera. A child out of wedlock, no husband. The words kept circling in Wade's head, but they didn't change anything. She'd saved Phoenix when nobody else would. That was all he needed to know. When dawn finally came, Wade wrapped Phoenix in a blanket and went outside to chop wood. The physical work helped the bite of cold air, the rhythm of the axe, the splitting crack of logs. He worked until his shoulders burned and sweat froze on his neck. He was stacking the last of the wood when he saw smoke rising from Mera's cabin across the ridge, thin and gray against the white sky. She was awake, probably getting ready to make the long walk over here with milk. Wade looked down at Phoenix sleeping peacefully against his chest. "We need to warn her," he said. Phoenix yawned. Wade loaded the wagon with the cord of firewood he'd promised Mera and drove across the ridge. The trail was barely visible under the snow, and twice the wheels got stuck. But he kept going because O'Connell wouldn't stop with one visit. The priest would be back, and he'd bring others. Mera's cabin looked worse in daylight. The roof sagged in the middle. The windows, except for the one Wade had replaced, were covered with oiled paper instead of glass. The whole structure leaned slightly to the left like it was tired of standing. Wade knocked on the door, waited, knocked again. "Mera, it's Wade." The door opened a crack. Mera peered out, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes wary. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Brought your firewood, and we need to talk." She looked past him at the wagon, then at Phoenix, bundled against his chest. "Is he sick?" "No, he's fine. Can I come in?" Mera hesitated, then opened the door wider. Wade stepped inside and stopped. The cabin was bare. One chair by the fire. A narrow bed in the corner with a single thin blanket. A small table with a chipped plate and cup. That was all. No curtains. No rugs. No pictures on the walls. It was less a home and more a place to not freeze to death. "I don't have much," Mera said quietly, reading his face. "I'm not here to judge." Wade shifted Phoenix higher on his shoulder. "Father O'Connell came to see me last night." Mera's whole body went rigid. "What did he say?" "That people are talking. About you coming to my place. About—" Wade paused. "About Thomas. About there being no husband." Mera turned away, her arms crossing over her chest. "I see. Is it true? Does it matter?" "To me, no. But it matters to them." Wade moved closer. "Mera O'Connell threatened me. Said if I don't send you away, the church will make sure nobody trades with me. That I'll be shut out come winter." "Then send me away." Her voice was flat dead. "I understand. I'm not sending you away." She turned to look at him. "What?" "I said I'm not sending you away. You saved Phoenix. You've been keeping him alive. I don't care what the church says." "You should care. They can destroy you, Wade. Take your land, run you out of the territory." "Let them try." "You don't understand." Mera's voice rose. "They did it to me. After Thomas died, they said I was being punished for my sin. Said he died because I wasn't married. They took everything: my job at the mercantile, my room at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. Nobody would hire me. Nobody would even speak to me. That's why I'm here in this—" She gestured at the bare cabin. "In this hole. Because the church decided I wasn't fit to live among decent people." Wade felt anger rising in his chest. Who was he, Thomas's father? Mera laughed bitterly. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." "Why?" "So you can judge me too. So I know who to hit next." That stopped her. She stared at him, her eyes wide. "His name was Marcus Brennan," she said finally. "He worked at the bank in town. Told me he loved me. Told me we'd get married as soon as he saved enough money." She swallowed hard. "When I told him I was pregnant, he said I was lying. Said the baby wasn't his. He left for Denver the next day." Wade's jaw clenched. "And nobody believed you?" "I was a seamstress. He was a banker. Who do you think they believed?" Mera moved to the window, looking out at the snow. "His family had money. Influence. The Brennans donated to the church, sat in the front pew every Sunday. I was nobody. Just some girl who got herself in trouble. That's not what happened. Doesn't matter what really happened. What matters is what people believe." She turned back to him. "And now they're going to believe you and I are that we're doing something shameful. They'll destroy you the same way they destroyed me. I won't let that happen." "You don't have a choice." "Yes, I do. I can stop coming." "Then Phoenix dies." "He's stronger now. You can feed him cow's milk." "He needs you, Mera." "He needs milk. Any milk. It doesn't have to be mine." Wade crossed the small cabin in 3 steps, stopping right in front of her. "It's not just the milk. You hold him. You talk to him. You make all of this bearable. You think I don't see that? You think I don't know that the only reason I'm still standing is because you keep showing up?" Mera's eyes filled with tears. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Tell the truth. Don't make this harder than it already is." She wiped her eyes. "I have to go, Wade, before they hurt you." "Where will you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere else. Somewhere they don't know me. With no money, no job. In the middle of winter." Wade shook his head. "You'll die out there." "Then I die. At least you and Phoenix will be safe." "Safe?" Wade's voice rose, startling Phoenix, who whimpered against his chest. Wade lowered his voice, bouncing the baby gently. "You think I'll be safe watching you walk away, knowing you're out there freezing because I was too much of a coward to stand up to a priest and some gossips? It's not about being a coward." "Then what is it about?" It's about being smart. Mera's voice broke. It's about not losing everything you have left because of me. I'm not worth it, Wade. I'm not worth your land, your reputation, your whole life. That's not your decision to make. Yes, it is. I'm the one they're talking about. I'm the scandal, and I can remove myself before it gets worse. Wade adjusted Phoenix in his arms, then looked Mera straight in the eye. What if we got married? The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Mera stared at him. What? You heard me. What if we got married, then they'd have nothing to talk about. You'd be respectable. Phoenix would have a mother, and O'Connell could go to hell. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Wade, your wife just died. You don't want to marry me. I don't want to marry anyone, Wade said honestly. But I want you to be safe, and I want Phoenix to have someone who cares about him. This solves both problems. Mera shook her head, backing away. No, this is insane. You don't marry someone just to stop gossip. People marry for worse reasons. People marry for love. And look where that got us. Wade's voice turned hard. Clara loved me, and she died. You loved Marcus, and he abandoned you. Maybe love isn't what we need right now. Maybe we just need, what, convenience, survival. Mera wrapped her arms around herself. I can't. I'm sorry, but I can't. Why not? Because everyone I love dies, Wade. Her voice dropped to a whisper. My mother died when I was 12. My father drank himself to death 2 years later. Marcus left. And Thomas. She choked on the name. I held him while he died, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. Everyone I love dies or leaves, and I can't do that again. I can't let myself care about you and Phoenix just to watch you. We're not going to die. You don't know that. No. But I know that walking away won't keep us safe. It'll just mean we're suffering alone instead of together. Mera closed her eyes. Tears ran down her cheeks. Think about it, Wade said gently. That's all I'm asking. Just think about it. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. I'll be back tomorrow with the rest of that firewood. Whether you're here or not, that's up to you. He walked out, leaving her standing alone in that bare cabin. The ride home was quiet except for Phoenix's occasional fussing. Wade's mind raced. Had he really just proposed marriage to a woman he barely knew? A woman the whole territory was gossiping about? Yes. And he'd do it again. Because the alternative was watching her walk away into a winter that would kill her. And Wade had already buried one woman he cared about. He wasn't doing it again. That afternoon, Wade was in the barn fixing a broken stall door when he heard horses approaching. He stepped outside and saw 4 men riding up the drive. He recognized 3 of them, John Henderson, William Coleman, and Sheriff Dawson. The 4th was a stranger in an expensive coat. Wade's hand moved instinctively to the rifle leaning against the barn wall. Gentlemen, he called out, something I can help you with. Sheriff Dawson dismounted first. He was a heavy-set man with a gray beard and tired eyes. Wade, we need to have a conversation. About the situation you've got yourself into. Wade didn't move. I don't have a situation. That's not what we're hearing. John Henderson dismounted, his face hard. You've got that Delaney woman coming here. Alone, after dark. My wife saw her leaving your place past midnight last week. She brings milk for my son, that's all. That's not all people are saying. William Coleman crossed his arms. Father O'Connell came to see us this morning. Said you struck him. He insulted a woman who's done nothing but help me. That woman is a whore, Coleman spat. Wade had the rifle in his hands before Coleman finished the word. Say that again. Sheriff Dawson stepped between them, his hands raised. Easy, Wade. We're not here to start a fight. Then why are you here? The stranger in the expensive coat finally spoke. His voice was smooth, educated. Mr. Turner, my name is Harold Brennan. Perhaps you've heard of me. Wade's blood went cold. Brennan, Marcus Brennan's father. I know who you are, Wade said. Then you understand why I'm here. Harold Brennan dismounted slowly, brushing snow off his coat. "I've heard troubling rumors about a certain woman. A woman who made false accusations against my son. A woman who is now apparently spending considerable time on your property. She saved my son's life. I'm sure that's what she told you." Brennan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Delaney is quite accomplished at manipulating men. She convinced my son to give her money, made wild claims about being pregnant. Then when he refused to be blackmailed, she produced some poor dead baby and claimed it was his." "That's a lie." "Is it? Were you there?" Brennan moved closer. "My son is a respectable banker with an impeccable reputation. Miss Delaney is a seamstress with loose morals and a talent for deception. Who would you believe?" Wade's finger moved to the rifle's trigger. "Get off my land." "Mr. Turner, I'm trying to help you. That woman is dangerous. She'll ruin your reputation, take your money, and leave you with nothing. Just like she tried to do to Marcus." "I said, get off my land." Brennan's smile vanished. "I own half the businesses in this territory, Mr. Turner. I have considerable influence with the territorial governor. If you continue associating with that woman, I will make sure you lose everything. Your land, your livestock, your ability to conduct business anywhere in Wyoming. Try it." "I don't have to try. I simply have to speak to the right people." Brennan mounted his horse again. "Consider this your only warning. Send Miss Delaney away and this all goes away. Keep her here and I'll destroy you." He rode off, Henderson and Coleman following. Sheriff Dawson lingered, looking uncomfortable. "Wade," he said quietly. "I know you don't want to hear this, but Brennan's not bluffing. He's got connections all the way to Washington. If he wants you gone, you'll be gone." "Whose side are you on, Sheriff?" "I'm not on anyone's side. I'm trying to keep the peace." Dawson mounted his horse. "Just be smart about this. That woman's not worth losing everything." "You're wrong," Wade said. "She's worth exactly that." Dawson shook his head and rode away. Wade stood in the yard holding his rifle, watching them disappear down the trail. Phoenix started crying from inside the cabin. Wade went to him, picked him up, fed him, changed him, rocked him until he fell back asleep. Then Wade sat at the table and did something he hadn't done since Clara's funeral. He wrote a letter. "Dear Mera," he began, then stopped, crossed it out, started again. The letter took him 2 hours. He wasn't good with words, never had been. But he needed her to understand what he was about to do. Needed her to know she had a choice. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. Then he hitched up the wagon and loaded it with everything he could spare. Food, blankets, tools, firewood. If Mera was going to leave, she'd at least have supplies. If she stayed, well, he'd cross that bridge when he came to it. The sun was setting when he reached her cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and gray. She was still there. Wade knocked. Waited. The door opened slowly. Mera looked terrible. Her eyes were red from crying, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she'd been packing her few belongings gathered in a small bundle on the table. "You're leaving," Wade said. "I have to." "No, you don't." He held out the letter. "Read this first. Then decide." She took it with shaking hands, unfolded it, read. Wade watched her face as she read. Watched the tears start. Watched her hand come up to cover her mouth. When she finished, she looked up at him. "Wade, I can't. This is too much. It's not enough, but it's what I have." He gestured to the wagon. "If you're leaving, take all of it. The supplies, everything. At least you'll have a chance. And if I stay? If you stay, we do this right. We get married, not because of love or church or any of that, because it makes sense. Because Phoenix needs a mother, and you need protection, and I need—" He stopped. "I need someone who understands what it's like to lose everything and keep going anyway." Mera folded the letter carefully. "You wrote that you'd give me half the ranch, that if we married it would be in my name too." "Yes." "Why would you do that?" "Because you need security. Real security, not just promises. Wade moved closer. If I die, you'd own the land. Nobody could take it from you. Not Brennan, not the church, not anyone. You'd be safe. But you'd lose everything if something happened. Then I lose everything. I'm willing to take that risk. He looked at her steadily. Are you? Mera was quiet for a long time. She looked down at the letter in her hands, then at the wagon full of supplies, then at Wade. Everyone I love dies, she whispered. I know. I couldn't survive losing someone else. I know that too. Then why are you asking me to risk it? Wade thought about that. About Clara dying in his arms. About holding Phoenix while he screamed and starved. About sitting in that cabin every night surrounded by ghosts. Because the risk of losing someone is still better than the certainty of being alone, he said finally. And because I think maybe we can help each other survive this. Not fix it, not make it better, just survive it. Mera closed her eyes. When she opened them, Wade saw something shift in her expression. Not hope exactly, but maybe the absence of complete despair. If I stay, she said slowly, it's just practical. A business arrangement. Nothing more. Nothing more, Wade agreed. I take care of Phoenix. You provide shelter and protection. That's all. That's all. And if it doesn't work, if people make it impossible, I leave. No questions asked. You leave, Wade said, even though the thought made his chest tighten. No questions asked. Mera looked at him for another long moment. Then she nodded. All right, she said. All right, I'll stay. Wade felt something loosen in his chest. Relief maybe, or just exhaustion finally catching up with him. We should do it soon, he said. The marriage. Before Brennan makes his next move. Father O'Connell won't marry us. Then we'll find someone who will. Judge Marshall over in Sweetwater. He owes me a favor. When? Wade thought about Brennan's threats. About O'Connell's cold smile. About how fast word traveled in this territory. Tomorrow, he said. We'll go tomorrow. Mera nodded slowly. Then she looked down at her worn dress, her bare cabin, her empty hands. I don't have anything to wear, she said quietly. Nothing nice enough for a wedding, even a practical one. Wade thought of the trunk at the foot of his bed. Clara's trunk full of clothes he couldn't bring himself to look at. I have something, he said. It's not new, but it's nice. Clara would want you to have it. Mera's eyes filled with tears again. I can't wear your dead wife's dress. Why not? She's not using it. Wade said it without thinking, then winced. Sorry. That was... No. Mera almost smiled. No, you're right. She's not using it. They stood there in the doorway of that bare cabin, two broken people agreeing to put their pieces together and call it whole. Tomorrow morning, Wade said. I'll come get you at dawn. We'll take Phoenix and ride to Sweetwater. Be married by noon. And then we come back here and figure out how to survive the rest of winter. Mera nodded. She looked exhausted but determined, like she'd made a decision she couldn't take back and was choosing to walk toward it anyway. I should unpack, she said, gesturing at the bundle on the table. I'll help you unload the wagon first. They worked in silence as the sun set, carrying supplies into the cabin. Food, blankets, tools, wood. With each trip, the bare cabin looked a little less empty, a little more like someone actually lived there. When they finished, Wade stood in the doorway, Phoenix asleep against his shoulder. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, Mera agreed. Wade walked back to his wagon. He was halfway home when Phoenix woke up crying hungry again. Wade fed him by moonlight sitting in the wagon bed, the baby's small body warm against his chest. We're getting you a mother tomorrow, Wade whispered. A real one. Someone who'll take care of you even when I don't know how. Phoenix yawned. I know it's strange, I know it's not how things are supposed to work, but maybe sometimes you have to make your own way, even if nobody understands it." The baby's eyes drifted closed again. Wade held him a little tighter. Tomorrow everything would change. For better or worse, he didn't know. But at least they'd face it together. That had to count for something. Wade didn't sleep that night either. He sat at the table with Clara's trunk open in front of him, staring at the blue dress folded on top. Clara had worn it to church every Sunday, had been wearing it the day Wade proposed. The fabric still smelled faintly of lavender. His hands shook as he lifted it out. Beneath it were more clothes, a hairbrush, letters tied with ribbon, a small daguerreotype of Clara's parents. All the pieces of a life that had ended too soon. Wade folded the dress carefully and set it aside. Then he closed the trunk and locked it. Some things you kept. Some things you let go. And some things existed in between where grief and necessity lived side by side. Phoenix woke twice before dawn, hungry and fussing. Wade fed him, changed him, walked him around the cabin until he settled. By the time the sun started rising, Wade had already hitched the wagon and loaded everything they'd need. Blankets, food for the journey, the blue dress wrapped in paper. He drove to Mera's cabin just as light broke over the ridge. She was waiting on the porch, wearing the same worn coat as always, her hair pulled back tight. She looked pale and thin and terrified. "Ready?" Wade asked. She nodded, didn't speak, just climbed onto the wagon seat beside him. They rode in silence for the first hour. Phoenix slept between them, bundled in blankets. The trail to Sweetwater was rough, barely more than wagon ruts through snow, and twice Wade had to get down and push when the wheels stuck. Mera helped without being asked. She climbed down and put her shoulder to the wagon, her breath coming in white clouds, her worn boots slipping in the snow. Wade watched her push with everything she had, this woman who barely ate enough to keep herself alive, and something twisted in his chest. When they finally got the wagon moving again, they were both breathing hard. "Thank you," Wade said. "You would have done it alone if I wasn't here." "Doesn't mean I don't appreciate the help." Mera climbed back onto the seat, her hands red with cold. Wade pulled off his gloves and handed them to her. "I don't need—" "Put them on, Mera." She looked at him for a moment, then took the gloves. They were too big for her hands, but she wore them anyway. They rode for another hour before Mera finally spoke. "What do I call you?" she asked. "After we're married, do I still call you Wade? What else would you call me?" "I don't know. Husband seems wrong. We're not. This isn't that kind of marriage." Wade thought about it. "Wade's fine. We don't need to pretend to be something we're not." "And what do you call me?" "Mera. Unless you want me to call you something else." She shook her head. "Mera's fine." More silence. The wagon wheels creaked. Phoenix made small sleeping sounds. "Have you done this before?" Mera asked suddenly. "Gotten married, I mean. Obviously you have. I meant—" She stopped, flustered. "I don't know what I meant." "You're asking if I know what to expect." "Yes." Wade kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Clara and I got married in a church. Big ceremony. Her whole family came. We said vows, exchanged rings, had a meal afterward. Everyone danced." He paused. "This won't be like that." "I know. Judge Marshall will say some words, we'll sign papers, and that'll be it. 5 minutes maybe, then it's done. And then we go home and figure out how to live with what we've done." Mera pulled his two big gloves tighter. "Do you regret it? Marrying Clara?" The question caught Wade off guard. "No, never." "Even though she died? Even though—" Wade glanced at her. "Do you regret Thomas? Even though he died?" Mera's breath hitched. "No. He was the best thing I ever did. Even if I only got 3 days with him." "Then you understand." She nodded slowly. They didn't speak again until Sweetwater came into view. The town was small, maybe 20 buildings clustered around a main street. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, and at the far end a small courthouse. Wade drove straight there and tied up the horses. "Wait here," he told Mera. "I'll see if Marshall's in." He climbed the courthouse steps and went inside. The building was cold and dim. A clerk sat at a desk near the door writing in a ledger. "Help you?" the clerk asked without looking up. "I need to see Judge Marshall." "He's in session. Come back this afternoon." "It can't wait." The clerk finally looked up. He was young, maybe 20, with ink-stained fingers and a bored expression. "Everything can wait, friend. Court's in session until noon." "I need to get married. Today. Now." That got the clerk's attention. He set down his pen. "You need a marriage license first. That takes 3 days." "I don't have 3 days." "Well, that's unfortunate, but listen." Wade leaned on the desk. "I've got a newborn baby out in that wagon, and a woman who needs protection from a man who's threatening to destroy both of us. I need Judge Marshall to marry us today, and I need you to make that happen." The clerk's eyes widened. "Sir, I can't just—" "You can. You go back there, you tell Marshall that Wade Turner is here, and you remind him that 3 years ago I pulled him out of a frozen creek before he drowned. He said if I ever needed anything, I should ask. Well, I'm asking." The clerk stared at Wade for a long moment. Then he stood up. "Wait here." He disappeared through a door. Wade heard muffled voices, then footsteps. The door opened again, and Judge Marshall himself came out. He was a tall man, late 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes. He looked Wade up and down, then smiled. "Wade Turner. I wondered if you'd ever call in that favor." "I'm calling it in now." "So I hear. A marriage, today. No license." "Yes, sir." Marshall's smile faded. "Must be serious." "It is." "The woman she's in the wagon outside. You can ask her yourself." Marshall nodded. "All right. Give me 10 minutes to finish with the drunk in my courtroom, then we'll take care of you." He paused. "You sure about this, son? Marriage isn't something you rush into." "I'm sure." "Even without love?" Wade met his eyes. "Especially without love. Love hasn't done either of us any favors." Marshall studied him for another moment, then clapped him on the shoulder. 10 minutes. Bring her inside." Wade went back to the wagon. Mera was sitting exactly where he'd left her, holding Phoenix, staring straight ahead. "He'll do it," Wade said. 10 minutes. Mera nodded. Didn't move. "Mera, we need to go inside." "I know. She looked down at Phoenix. "What if this is a mistake? What if we're making everything worse? Then we'll figure it out. Together." Wade held out his hand. "Come on." She took his hand and let him help her down from the wagon. Phoenix woke up and started fussing, but Mera bounced him gently and he settled. They walked up the courthouse steps together, Wade carrying the package with Clara's dress. Inside, the clerk showed them to a small room with a desk and 2 chairs. "Judge will be right with you. There's a washroom down the hall if you need it." Wade looked at Mera. She was still wearing her worn coat and muddy boots. Her hair was coming loose from its pins. "You want to change?" he asked, holding out the package. "Into the dress." Mera took it slowly, unwrapped the paper. When she saw the blue fabric, her eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It was Clara's favorite. I can't wear this, Wade. It's not right." "Clara would want you to have it. She'd want Phoenix to have a mother, even if that mother's wearing her dress." Wade touched Mera's shoulder gently. "Go change. We've got a few minutes." Mera disappeared down the hall. Wade sat in one of the chairs holding Phoenix, listening to his own heartbeat. What was he doing marrying a woman he barely knew to spite a town that had already turned against them both? It was insane. Reckless. Exactly the kind of thing Wade never did. But he was doing it anyway. The door opened and Mera came back in. Wade's breath caught. The blue dress fit her almost perfectly, a little loose in the shoulders, a little short in the hem, but beautiful. She'd let her hair down, and it fell in dark waves around her face. She looked young suddenly and scared, and nothing like the hard, closed-off woman who'd walked through a blizzard with milk. "How do I look?" she asked quietly. "Like someone worth fighting for," Wade said without thinking. Mera's face flushed. She looked down at Phoenix. "May I hold him during the ceremony?" Wade handed him over. She cradled the baby against her chest, and for just a moment they looked like a real family. Mother, father, child. Like this was a real wedding with real love behind it. Then Judge Marshall walked in, and the illusion shattered. "Well," Marshall said, looking at them both. "You two ready to do this?" "Yes, sir," Wade said. "Miss, I didn't catch your name." "Mera. Mera Delaney." Marshall's eyebrows rose slightly. "Delaney. I know that name. You're the woman from—" "Yes," Mera said quickly. "I'm that woman." Marshall looked between them. "I see. And you're sure about this, Miss Delaney? No one's forcing you?" "I'm sure. Because if there's any coercion involved, I can't—" "There's no coercion," Wade interrupted. "We're doing this of our own free will, both of us." Marshall studied them for another long moment. Then he nodded. "All right then. Let's make this official." The ceremony took less than 5 minutes. Marshall read from a book, asked them both if they took each other as husband and wife. They both said yes. Wade signed the marriage certificate. Then Mera signed it, her hand shaking so badly she could barely write her name. "By the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Marshall said. He looked at Wade. "You may kiss the bride if you'd like." Wade and Mera looked at each other. Neither moved. "Or not," Marshall added diplomatically. "The certificate's legal either way." Wade shook Marshall's hand. "Thank you, sir. I won't forget this." "Just take care of that baby and that woman," Marshall said. "That's thanks enough." They walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunlight. Wade helped Mera back onto the wagon, Phoenix still in her arms. They rode out of town without speaking. It wasn't until they were halfway home that Mera finally broke the silence. "We're married," she said like she couldn't quite believe it. "We're married," Wade confirmed. "What do we do now?" Wade thought about that. About going home to that cabin, to Clara's things and Thomas's memory, and all the ghosts they'd brought with them into this strange new arrangement. "Now we survive," he said. "One day at a time." Mera nodded. She looked down at Phoenix sleeping peacefully in her arms. "He needs a proper name. Phoenix is strong, but he needs something else, something that means he's ours now." "Ours," Wade repeated. The word felt strange in his mouth. "Phoenix Samuel Turner, after Clara's father." "Phoenix Samuel Turner," Mera said softly. "I like that." They rode the rest of the way home as the sun set behind them. When they finally reached the ranch, Wade saw something that made his blood run cold. Smoke, rising from his barn. "No," he breathed. He drove the wagon faster, his heart pounding. As they got closer, he could see flames licking through the barn roof. His horses were screaming inside. Wade jumped down before the wagon stopped moving. "Stay here." He ran toward the barn, but the heat drove him back. The whole structure was engulfed, the fire roaring like a living thing. He could hear the horses inside panicking, dying. Then he saw him. Harold Brennan sitting on his horse at the edge of the property watching. Smiling. Wade started toward him, rage blinding him, but Mera grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said urgently. "That's what he wants. He wants you to attack him so he can have you arrested." "He burned my barn." "I know, but if you touch him, he wins." Mera's fingers dug into his arm. "Please, Wade, think of Phoenix." Wade looked back at his son crying in the wagon, then at Brennan still smiling, then at his barn collapsing in on itself. He couldn't save the horses. couldn't save the building, could barely breathe through the fury choking him. But he could keep himself from doing something stupid. He turned away from Brennan and walked back to the wagon. Behind him, he heard Brennan laugh. "That's just the beginning, Turner," Brennan called out. "Next time it'll be the house, or maybe something worse. You've got 1 week to send that whore away. 1 week." Wade climbed onto the wagon seat, took the reins in shaking hands, drove past his burning barn without looking back. They made it to the cabin before Wade finally let himself feel it. The loss, the rage, the complete helplessness of watching everything burn while the man responsible rode away. He helped Mera down from the wagon, his hands mechanical, carried Phoenix inside, set him in the cradle. Then he walked back outside and stood in the yard staring at the orange glow on the horizon where his barn used to be. Mera came out and stood beside him. She'd changed out of Clara's dress and back into her worn clothes. She didn't say anything, just stood there with him while the barn burned. 3 horses, Wade said finally. All dead. And everything I stored in there. Tools, hay, winter feed. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. Yes, it is. He did this because of me. Wade shook his head. He did this because he's a rich man who thinks he can do whatever he wants. That's on him, not you. But if I left, if you left, he'd win. Is that what you want? Mera wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know what I want anymore. Wade looked at her, this woman who'd become his wife hours ago, who was wearing his dead wife's gloves, who was standing beside him watching his life burn. I want him to pay, Wade said quietly. I want him to hurt the way he's hurt us. He stopped. I want a lot of things I can't have. So what do? We rebuild. We survive. We don't let him break us. How he'll keep coming after us. He said so himself, the house is next or something worse. How do we stop him? Wade didn't have an answer. He just stood there in the cold, watching the glow fade as his barn turned to ash. Behind them, Phoenix started crying. Mera went inside to tend to him. Wade stayed outside a while longer, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight. 1 week. That's what Brennan had given them. 1 week to send Mera away or face something worse. But Wade had already made his choice. He'd married her. Put his name on that certificate next to hers. Made her part of his life in a way that couldn't be undone. And if Brennan wanted to destroy him for it, then so be it. Wade wouldn't go down easy. He turned and walked back into the cabin. Mera was sitting in the rocking chair nursing Phoenix. The firelight caught her face, made her look softer somehow, younger. I'll ride to town tomorrow, Wade said. File a report with Sheriff Dawson about the barn. He won't do anything. He's afraid of Brennan. Maybe. But it'll be on record. And maybe that'll matter someday. Mera looked up at him. You really think we can win this? No, Wade said honestly. But I think we can make him regret starting it. She almost smiled. You're stubborn. Pot kettle. This time she did smile just a little. Phoenix finished nursing and fell asleep in her arms. Mera stood carefully and laid him in the cradle, tucking the blanket around him. I should go back to my cabin, she said. It's late. You could stay here. The words came out before Wade could stop them. It's dark and the trail's dangerous. You could sleep in the bed. I'll take the chair. Mera hesitated. People will talk. People are already talking. We're married now. It's not scandalous for a wife to sleep in her husband's house. This isn't a real marriage, Wade. The certificate says otherwise. They looked at each other across the small cabin. Wade could see her weighing at the risk of staying against the risk of walking home alone in the dark. All right, she said finally. Just for tonight. Wade nodded. He banked the fire, checked on Phoenix one more time, then settled into the rocking chair with a blanket. Mera disappeared behind the curtain that separated the bedroom from the main room. Wade closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but all he could see was his barn burning. All he could hear was Brennan's laugh. And all he could feel was the weight of the choice he'd made to fight a man with infinite resources and nothing to lose. But at least he wasn't fighting alone anymore. That had to count for something. Across the room he heard Mera's breathing slow, heard Phoenix's tiny snores, heard the wind picking up outside carrying the smell of smoke and ash. Tomorrow he'd ride to town. Tomorrow he'd face Dawson's useless sympathy and the townspeople's judgment. Tomorrow he'd start figuring out how to rebuild. But tonight he just sat in the darkness and listened to the sounds of people breathing, of life continuing despite everything trying to stop it. It wasn't much, but right now it was enough. Wade woke to the sound of Mera moving around the cabin. For a confused moment, he thought it was Clara, that everything had been a nightmare, and he'd wake to find his wife making breakfast, her belly round with their unborn child. Then, reality crashed back. Clara was dead. His barn was ashes. And the woman in his kitchen was his wife in name, only bound to him by desperation and a piece of paper. He sat up, his neck stiff from sleeping in the chair. Mera was at the stove heating milk for Phoenix. She'd already changed the baby and dressed him in clean clothes. She moved quietly, efficiently, like she'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. "Morning," Wade said, his voice rough. Mera jumped slightly, then turned. "I didn't want to wake you. You looked like you needed the sleep." "What time is it?" "Just past dawn. Phoenix woke up hungry an hour ago." She poured the warmed milk into a bottle and tested it on her wrist. "I'm almost out of milk. I'll need to go back to my cabin today." Wade stood, his muscles aching. "I'll take you after I get back from town." "You're really going to file that report?" "I said I would." Mera handed him the bottle. "You feed him. I'll make coffee." Wade took Phoenix from the cradle and settled into the rocking chair. The baby latched onto the bottle eagerly, his small hands grasping at Wade's fingers. Wade watched him eat and thought about the barn, about the 3 horses that had died screaming, about Brennan's smile. "I've been thinking," Mera set her back to him as she worked at the stove, "about what Brennan said, about having 1 week. Don't. Wade, listen. If I leave before the week is up, maybe—" "No." Wade's voice was firm. "We already had this conversation. You're not leaving. But your barn can be rebuilt. What can't be rebuilt is my conscience if I let you walk away to save my property." He looked up at her. "We're married, Mera. For better or worse. I'm not throwing you to the wolves to save some wood and nails." Mera turned to face him. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "You don't understand what men like Brennan are capable of." "Then help me understand." She poured 2 cups of coffee and sat at the table. "When I was pregnant with Thomas, Marcus told his father I was trying to trap him, trying to extort money from the family. His father, Harold, he came to see me at the boarding house where I lived." Wade watched her face as she spoke, saw her hands shake around the coffee cup. "He offered me money," Mera continued. $500 to leave town and never speak about Marcus or the baby again. When I refused, he said he'd ruin me. Make sure I never worked again, never had a home again. I thought he was bluffing." She laughed bitterly. "I was so stupid. Within a week I'd lost my job at the mercantile. Mrs. Patterson threw me out of the boarding house. Nobody would hire me. Nobody would even sell me food. I had to steal just to eat." "How did you survive?" "Barely. I found the old Pruitt cabin. It was abandoned, falling apart, but it had a roof and a door I could bar. I trapped rabbits, stole vegetables from gardens at night, and I waited for Thomas to be born." Her voice broke. I thought once he was here, once people saw him, they'd understand. They'd see I was telling the truth. But they didn't. No, they saw a bastard baby and a ruined woman. And when Thomas died, they said it was God's judgment on my sin." She wiped her eyes. "So I buried him behind that cabin, and I stopped hoping that people would be kind. Because they won't. Not to someone like me." Wade finished feeding Phoenix and set the bottle aside. He moved to the table and sat across from Mera. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what they did to you, for what he did. Sorry doesn't change anything. No, but knowing what we're up against does. Wade leaned forward. Brennan thinks he can scare us into submission. Maybe he's right. Maybe he'll burn down this house too. Maybe he'll destroy everything I have. But he won't break us. Not if we don't let him. You're talking about fighting him. You can't win that fight, Wade. He has money influence power. What do we have? Each other. Wade reached across the table and took her hand. She flinched, but didn't pull away. And sometimes that's enough. Mera looked down at their joined hands. I want to believe that. Then believe it. She met his eyes. For a moment, Wade saw something shift in her expression, a tiny crack in the wall she'd built around herself. Then Phoenix started fussing, and the moment passed. Wade rode into town an hour later, leaving Mera at the cabin with Phoenix. The burned remains of his barn were visible from the trail, a black scar on the white landscape. Wade forced himself to look at it, to remember what Brennan had done. The sheriff's office was at the far end of town next to the jail. Wade tied his horse outside and walked in. Sheriff Dawson was at his desk writing in a ledger. He looked up when Wade entered, and his face went carefully neutral. Wade, heard about your barn. I'm here to file a formal report, arson. Dawson set down his pen. You have proof it was arson. I saw Harold Brennan watching it burn. He was still there when I got home. That's not proof, Wade. That's circumstantial. He threatened me the day before, said he'd burn my property if I didn't send Mera away. Then my barn burns down and he's there watching. That's not circumstantial, Sheriff. That's a confession. Dawson sighed and rubbed his face. Look, I understand you're angry, but accusing a man like Brennan of a crime like arson, you need more than threats and coincidence. What do I need? A signed confession. You need witnesses, evidence, something that would hold up in court. The man burned down my barn and killed my horses. What more evidence do you need? Something I can take to a judge without getting laughed out of his chambers. Dawson stood and moved to the window. Wade, I know you think I'm being difficult, but Brennan's got connections all the way to the territorial governor. If I accuse him without solid proof, he'll have my badge and my head. Then who'll be left to keep the peace around here? Wade's hands clenched into fists. So you're just going to let him get away with it? I'm going to do my job within the limits of the law. And right now, the law says I need evidence. Dawson turned back to him. But I'll tell you what I can do. I'll ride out to your place, document the damage, take some statements. If I find anything that ties Brennan to the fire, I'll pursue it. Fair enough? It wasn't fair. It wasn't even close to fair. But it was better than nothing. Fine, Wade said. Come out this afternoon. I will. Dawson sat back down. And Wade, be careful. Brennan's not done with you yet. I know. Wade left the sheriff's office and walked down the main street. People stared at him, some with pity, some with curiosity, some with open hostility. News of his marriage to Mera had already spread. He could see it in their faces, hear it in the way conversations stopped when he passed. He was halfway to the general store when Margaret Henderson stepped in front of him. Wade Turner, she said, her voice cold. I heard what you did. Good morning to you too, Margaret. Don't you good morning me. You married that woman. That harlot. After everything Clara was to you. Wade's jaw tightened. Clara's dead. And Mera saved my son's life when you and everyone else in this town turned us away. So yes, I married her. And I'd do it again. She's a sinner, Wade. Everyone knows what she did. And now you've tied yourself to her shame. The only shame I see is how this town treats people it decides aren't worthy. Wade stepped around her. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have supplies to buy. He walked into the general store before Margaret could respond. The shopkeeper, a thin man named Grayson, looked up from behind the counter. His expression wasn't friendly. Help you, Turner. I need nails, lumber, and roofing tar, enough to rebuild a barn. Grayson's eyebrows rose. Heard about that terrible accident. It wasn't an accident. That's not what I heard. Grayson pulled out a ledger. Heard you've been having some trouble lately. Financial trouble. My credit's good here. Has been for 3 years. Was good. But I can't extend credit to someone who might not be around to pay it back. Grayson closed the ledger. Cash only. And the prices have gone up. Wade stared at him. You're joking. Not joking, just business. Grayson smiled thinly. You understand. Wade understood perfectly. Brennan had gotten to him. Had gotten to everyone. This was how it would be now, doors closing credit, drying up prices rising. All the little ways a town could strangle someone without actually putting their hands around their throat. Fine, Wade said. I'll take my business elsewhere. Good luck with that. Wade walked out, his face burning. He tried the hardware store next, then the lumber yard. Same story everywhere. No credit. Prices doubled or tripled. Some wouldn't even talk to him. By noon, Wade was back on his horse riding home, with nothing to show for the trip but rage and humiliation. Sheriff Dawson would come document the barn and then do nothing. The town had turned against him. And Brennan was probably sitting in his fancy house, laughing. When Wade got back to the cabin, he found Mera outside hanging laundry on a line she'd strung between 2 trees. Phoenix was in a basket at her feet, bundled against the cold. How did it go? She asked. Wade dismounted and told her everything. The sheriff's excuses, the town's hostility, the stores refusing to sell to him. Mera listened without interrupting. When he finished, she just nodded. I told you, she said. This is what Brennan does. He doesn't just attack you directly. He makes everyone else do it for him, turns the whole town into his weapon. So what do? We survive. Like you said. Mera picked up Phoenix and held him close. I have some money. Not much, but enough to buy supplies in Sweetwater. They don't know us there. We can get what we need and rebuild. I can't take your money. It's our money now. That's what marriage means, doesn't it? What's mine is yours. She looked at him steadily. Let me help you, Wade. You've been helping me since the first night I showed up. Let me return the favor. Wade wanted to argue, wanted to say he could handle this himself. But the truth was, he couldn't. Not anymore. All right, he said. We'll go to Sweetwater tomorrow. Get supplies. Start rebuilding. Good. Mera handed Phoenix back to him. Now help me finish this laundry. Then we're going to my cabin to get the rest of my things. If I'm your wife, I should probably live here instead of walking back and forth every day. You want to move in? I don't want to, but it makes sense. She pulled another shirt from the basket. Besides, it'll drive the gossips crazy. Might as well give them something to really talk about. Wade almost smiled. Almost. That afternoon, they loaded Mera's few belongings into the wagon and brought them to the ranch. It didn't take long, she had so little. A few clothes, some cooking pots, a small wooden box that she wouldn't let Wade touch. What's in there? He asked. Things from Thomas. His blanket. A lock of his hair. Mera clutched the box to her chest. It's all I have left of him. Wade didn't push. He understood about keeping pieces of the dead close. They set up Mera's things in the cabin. She hung her coat next to Wade's, put her cooking pots on the shelf beside Clara's, set the wooden box on the mantel next to the photograph of Clara's parents. It felt strange watching another woman's belongings mix with Clara's, like 2 different lives trying to occupy the same space. But Wade didn't say anything. This was the arrangement they'd made. They'd both have to learn to live with the strangeness. That night they ate dinner in silence. Mera cooked some kind of stew with the last of the vegetables from Wade's cellar. It was better than anything Wade had made in weeks. Where did you learn to cook? He asked. My mother. Before she died, she taught me everything she knew. Said a woman who could cook would never starve. Mera stirred the pot. She was wrong about that. But the cooking part stuck. After dinner, Mera washed the dishes while Wade tended to Phoenix. They moved around each other carefully like dancers learning a new routine. Not touching, not talking much, just existing in the same small space. When Phoenix was asleep, Wade banked the fire and checked the doors. Mera had already disappeared behind the curtain to the bedroom. "Mera," Wade called softly. "Yes." "Tomorrow after we get supplies, I want to go to your cabin, to Thomas's grave." Silence. Then, "Why?" "Because if we're going to be a family, even a practical one, then Thomas is part of that. I want to pay my respects." More silence. Wade thought maybe she'd refuse. Then he heard her voice thick with tears. "All right, we'll go tomorrow." Wade settled into the rocking chair again, closed his eyes, listened to the sound of Mera crying softly behind the curtain, trying to muffle it so he wouldn't hear. He wanted to go to her, wanted to say something comforting, but he didn't know what. So he just sat there keeping watch over the living while Mera grieved for the dead. The next morning they rode to Sweetwater before dawn. The trip was easier this time. No storm, no crisis, just a long, cold ride with Phoenix sleeping between them. They bought supplies with Mera's money, loading the wagon with lumber, nails, tar, and everything else Wade would need to rebuild. "This is going to take months," Wade said, looking at the pile in the wagon bed. "Then it takes months." Mera adjusted Phoenix's blanket. "We have time." On the way back, they stopped at Mera's old cabin. Wade had never been inside before. Now, seeing it in daylight, he understood how little she'd had. One room. Dirt floor. Walls that let in wind and rain. This was what Brennan had reduced her to. "I'll burn it down," Mera said, standing in the doorway. "After we take what we need. I don't want anyone else living in this place. We could fix it up, use it for storage, or—" "I want it gone, Wade. Every time I look at it, I see Thomas dying in my arms. I see myself alone and desperate and—" Her voice broke. "I want it gone. Then we'll burn it." They walked around back to the willow tree Mera had mentioned. Beneath it was a small grave marked with a wooden cross. Someone Mera probably had scratched words into the wood. Thomas. Loved. Wade knelt beside the grave. The ground was frozen solid, covered in snow. He brushed some of it away, revealing the dark earth beneath. "I'm sorry I never got to meet you, Thomas," Wade said quietly. "Your mother tells me you were a fighter, that you tried hard to stay. I respect that, and I promise you I'll take care of her. She'll never be alone like that again." Beside him, Mera was crying openly now. Wade stood and put his arm around her shoulders. She stiffened for a moment, then leaned into him, her face pressed against his coat. "He was so small," she whispered. "So perfect, and I couldn't save him. That wasn't your fault. Everyone said it was. Said God took him because I was a sinner. God didn't take him. Bad luck did. Bad lungs. Things that happen to babies sometimes, no matter who their parents are." Wade tightened his arm around her. "You loved him. That's what mattered." Mera pulled away and wiped her eyes. "We should go. Phoenix needs to eat soon." Wade looked back at the grave one more time. "Do you want to bring him with us? Bury him on the ranch near the house?" Mera's breath caught. "You'd let me do that? He's family now. Family should be together." Mera nodded, unable to speak. They dug up the small coffin, just a wooden box Mera had built herself, and loaded it carefully into the wagon. Then Mera went back into the cabin one last time, emerging with a burning stick from the hearth. She stood in the doorway holding the flame. "Goodbye," she said to the empty cabin. "Thank you for keeping me alive, but I don't need you anymore." She dropped the stick onto the straw floor. The fire caught, quickly spreading fast. Within minutes, the whole structure was burning. They stood together and watched it burn, Wade, Mera, and Phoenix sleeping in Mera's arms. The cabin collapsed in on itself, just like Wade's barn had. But this time, the fire felt different. Not like destruction, like release. When it was over, they climbed back onto the wagon and rode home. Mera held Thomas's coffin in her lap, her arms wrapped around it, her face peaceful for the first time since Wade had known her. At the ranch, Wade dug a grave in the frozen ground near the house, right where he'd told Mera he would plant an apple tree in spring. They buried Thomas as the sun set, just the two of them in Phoenix. Mera knelt beside the fresh grave and placed her hand on the earth. "I love you," she whispered. "I'll always love you, but I have to let you rest now. I have to. I have to keep living." Wade gave her time. When she finally stood, her face was wet with tears, but her shoulders were straight. She looked at Wade. "Thank you," she said simply. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. For this. For everything." She looked down at Phoenix, stirring in his sleep. "For giving me a reason to keep going." They walked back to the cabin together. Behind them, the sun set over Thomas's grave, painting the snow gold and pink. And for the first time since this whole impossible thing began, Wade felt something that might have been hope. It was small, fragile, easy to crush. But it was there. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to get them through whatever came next. The week Brennan had given them passed without incident. Wade spent every daylight hour rebuilding the barn, working until his hands bled and his back screamed. Mera helped where she could, holding boards steady while he hammered, mixing tar, keeping Phoenix wrapped warm while she worked. They didn't talk much during those days, just worked side by side, building something out of the ashes of what had been destroyed. On the 8th day, Wade woke to find fresh snow covering everything. He went outside and stopped. Someone had driven stakes into the ground around his property, each one marked with a red cloth. Wade walked to the nearest one and pulled it up. Tied to it was a notice on official paper. "Mera," he called. She came running, Phoenix in her arms. "What is it?" Wade read the notice aloud. "Notice of land dispute. Harold Brennan claims ownership of the water rights to this property based on territorial survey from 1873. All structures built after that date are considered trespass. Vacate within 30 days or face legal action." Mera's face went white. "Can he do that?" "I don't know. I've owned this land for 5 years. The deed is registered." Wade crumpled the notice in his fist. "But if he's got lawyers and judges in his pocket, maybe he can do whatever he wants. We need to fight this. With what I spent the last of our money on lumber, we've got no savings, no credit, and a territory full of people who won't lift a finger to help us." Wade threw the stake as far as he could. "He's going to take everything." "No." Mera's voice was hard. "No, he's not. I won't let him." "What can we do that we haven't already done?" "We can tell the truth, publicly. We can go to the newspaper in Cheyenne, tell them what Brennan did to me, to Thomas, to you. Make him answer for it." Wade shook his head. "Who's going to believe us over him?" "I don't know, but I'm tired of hiding. Tired of letting him make me feel ashamed when he's the one who should be ashamed." Mera shifted Phoenix higher on her hip. "He thinks he can scare us into disappearing. Let's show him he's wrong." Wade looked at her, this woman who'd been beaten down by life again and again, but kept getting back up. This woman who'd walked through a blizzard to save a stranger's child. This woman who was his wife, even if neither of them quite knew what that meant yet. "All right," he said. "We fight, but we do it smart. We need proof, documentation, everything we can gather that shows what he's done. I kept letters from Marcus, from before he left. They prove he knew about the baby that he'd promised to marry me." "That's good. And I've got the deed to this property, the bills of sale for the horses he killed, Sheriff Dawson's report on the barn fire. Will it be enough?" "It'll have to be." They spent the next 2 days gathering everything they had. Mera's letters carefully preserved despite everything she'd been through. Wade's property documents, statements from the few townspeople who'd been willing to talk, not many, but a couple. Old Mrs. Chen wrote down what she remembered about Thomas's birth, about how Mera had begged for help and been refused. Judge Marshall sent a notarized copy of their marriage certificate with a letter stating he'd witnessed no coercion. It wasn't much, but it was something. On the third day, Wade hitched up the wagon. They'd have to take Phoenix with them, there was no one to leave him with, and Wade wouldn't trust anyone in town anyway. It would be a hard trip 2 days each way in the cold, but there was no choice. They were loading the last of their supplies when they heard horses. Multiple horses. Wade grabbed his rifle and stepped in front of Mera. 8 men rode into the yard. Harold Brennan was at the front, flanked by Sheriff Dawson, and 6 others Wade didn't recognize. They were all armed. "Mr. Turner," Brennan called out, not dismounting. "I trust you received my notice." "I received it, and I'm contesting it." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that I own this property legally, and you're trying to steal it." Brennan smiled that cold smile Wade had come to hate. "The courts will determine who owns what. In the meantime, I'm here to ensure you don't damage my property any further. That barn you're rebuilding, that's on land I claim. You'll cease construction immediately." "Like hell I will." "Wade." Sheriff Dawson spoke up, his voice tired. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. There's a legal process. Let it play out." "The legal process is rigged, and you know it. Be that as it may, you're still bound by it." Dawson gestured to the men with him. "These men are deputies. They're here to enforce the cease order. If you continue building, you'll be arrested for trespassing." Wade's hands tightened on the rifle. Behind him, he heard Mera's sharp intake of breath. "You're really going to let him do this?" Wade asked Dawson. "You're going to stand there and help him steal my land?" "I'm enforcing the law as it's been presented to me." "The law." Wade laughed bitterly. "Where was the law when he burned my barn, when he killed my horses? Where was the law when he destroyed Mera's life and let her son die in poverty?" "That's enough," Brennan said sharply. "Sheriff, remove this man from my property." "It's not your property. The courts will decide that. But until they do, you're trespassing." Brennan's eyes moved to Mera standing behind Wade, with Phoenix in her arms. "You and your whore both." Wade pulled the rifle up, aiming at Brennan's chest. "Say that again." The deputies drew their weapons instantly. 8 guns pointed at Wade's head. "Wade, don't—" Mera grabbed his arm. "Please, think of Phoenix." Wade's finger was on the trigger. One squeeze. That's all it would take. Brennan would die, and Wade would die, and maybe that would be justice enough. But then Phoenix started crying, frightened by the tension and the guns and the raised voices. And Wade heard Mera's voice, desperate and terrified. "Please, Wade, please don't leave me alone again." Wade lowered the rifle slowly. The deputies didn't lower theirs. "Smart choice," Brennan said. "Now you have 30 days to vacate this property. Any attempts to contest the claim will be handled through proper legal channels. If you're not gone in 30 days, I'll have you forcibly removed." He gathered his reins. "And Mr. Turner, next time you point a weapon at me, you'd better pull the trigger, because I won't give you a third chance." He rode off, the deputies following. Sheriff Dawson lingered for a moment. "I'm sorry, Wade," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, I don't like this any more than you do. But you'll enforce it anyway. I have a family to feed, same as you." Dawson turned his horse. 30 days. Use them wisely." When they were gone, Wade's legs gave out. He sat down hard in the snow, still holding the rifle, his whole body shaking. Mera knelt beside him. "You did the right thing." "Did I? Because it doesn't feel right. It feels like I just let him win." "You didn't let him win. You kept us alive to fight another day." She touched his face gently. "That's what matters." Wade looked up at her, at this woman who'd become his anchor without either of them planning it. "What if we can't win? What if we go to Cheyenne and nobody cares? Then we tried, and we'll figure out what comes next." Mera helped him stand. But we don't give up. Not while we're still breathing. They left for Cheyenne the next morning. The trip was brutal, freezing temperatures, terrible roads, and Phoenix fussing most of the way because he could feel his parents' tension. But they pushed through, stopping only when they had to, sleeping in the wagon wrapped in every blanket they owned. The Cheyenne Chronicle office was in a brick building near the territorial capital. Wade and Mera walked in looking like what they were, desperate people with nowhere else to turn. The clerk at the front desk took one look at them and frowned. "We need to speak to a journalist," Wade said. "About a story. About corruption and land theft, and everyone's got a story." The clerk didn't look up from his papers. "You'll need to make an appointment." "We don't have time for an appointment. We have 30 days before we lose everything." "Still need an appointment." Mera stepped forward, pulling the letters from her coat. "Harold Brennan seduced me, got me pregnant, then destroyed my life when I wouldn't disappear quietly. My son died because no one would help me, and now he's trying to steal my husband's land because I dared to marry someone who'd give me shelter. If that's not a story, I don't know what is." The clerk finally looked up. His eyes moved from Mera to the letters in her hand to Phoenix on her hip. "Wait here," he said. He disappeared into the back. 5 minutes later, a woman emerged. She was perhaps 40, with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers. She looked at Wade and Mera with the assessing gaze of someone who'd heard every sob story in the territory and learned to spot the real ones. "I'm Catherine Price," she said. "I'm the Chronicle's investigative correspondent. You have 15 minutes to tell me why I should care about your problems." Wade and Mera told her everything. About Clara's death and Phoenix's near starvation, and Mera walking through the blizzard. About Marcus Brennan's betrayal and Thomas's death, and the town that had turned its back on both of them. About the barn burning and the land claim and the 30 days they had left. Catherine listened without interrupting. She took notes, asked pointed questions, and when they finished, she sat back and studied them. "The Brennans are powerful," she said finally. "They advertise in this paper. They have friends in the territorial government. If I publish this story, they'll come after me too." "So you won't help us?" Wade stood to leave. "I didn't say that." Catherine tapped her pen on her notebook. "I said they're powerful, but I've been looking for a way to expose them for years. Harold Brennan has destroyed a lot of lives. If I can prove it, if I can tie him to specific crimes, arson, harassment, corruption, that's a story worth risking my career for." "What do you need from us?" Mera asked. "Everything you've got. Letters, documents, witnesses. I'll investigate, corroborate what I can. If it's solid, I'll run it. Front page." Catherine leaned forward. "But you need to understand this will make you targets. More than you already are. Are you prepared for that?" Wade looked at Mera. She looked back at him. And in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a commitment, a choice made together. "We're already targets," Mera said. "Might as well make some noise on the way down." Catherine almost smiled. "All right then, let's burn some bridges." They spent the next 3 days in Cheyenne working with Catherine. She interviewed them separately, checked their stories against public records, sent telegrams to contacts in other territories. She dug into Harold Brennan's past and found other women Marcus had promised to marry, other business partners Harold had destroyed, other pieces of property acquired through questionable means. By the 3rd day, Catherine had enough for her story. She showed them the draft. "It'll run tomorrow morning," she said. "Front page, full column. I've titled it, 'The Brennan Empire Built on Broken Promises and Stolen Lives.' It names names, shows patterns, raises questions about land claims and judicial corruption. It's going to cause a firestorm." "Will it be enough to stop the eviction?" Wade asked. "I don't know, but it'll put pressure on everyone involved, make it harder for them to operate in the shadows." Catherine looked at them both seriously. "You should know Harold Brennan has killed people for less than this. Not directly, but through hired men, arranged accidents. You'll need to be careful." "We've been careful," Mera said. "Look where it got us." The story ran the next morning. By noon, it had spread across the territory. By evening, the territorial governor's office had announced an investigation into land claim procedures. By midnight, Harold Brennan's lawyer had filed a defamation suit against the Chronicle. Wade and Mera started the long journey home that night, not wanting to be in the city when Brennan's response came. They drove through darkness, taking turns sleeping in the wagon bed, while the other kept the horses moving. They were a day from home when they saw the smoke. Wade's heart sank. He pushed the horses harder, dread building in his chest. Please not the house. Please not the house. But as they crested the final ridge, Wade saw his house was still standing. The smoke was coming from somewhere else from the direction of town. They drove straight there, joining a crowd gathered in the main street. The bank was burning. Harold Brennan's bank where Marcus had worked. Flames poured from the windows and people stood watching with expressions ranging from satisfaction to fear. What happened? Wade asked someone in the crowd. Started this morning right after folks read that newspaper story. Someone threw burning rags through the windows. The man spat tobacco juice. Guess folks were tired of the Brennans thinking they owned everything. Wade found Sheriff Dawson trying to organize a bucket brigade, though most people were more interested in watching than helping. Sheriff, Wade called. Did Brennan do this to blame us? Dawson wiped soot from his face. Don't know who did it, but Brennan's been here all morning. Half the town saw him, so unless he hired someone... He shook his head. Sometimes people just get fed up. Sometimes they fight back. The bank burned for hours. By the time the flames died down, there was nothing left but a blackened shell. Harold Brennan stood across the street watching his son's workplace turn to ash, his face carved from stone. Wade started to move toward him, but Mera grabbed his arm. Don't, she said. Let him sit with it. Let him feel what we felt. So they stood in the crowd and watched Harold Brennan watch his empire crumble. And when the man finally turned and walked away, his shoulders were bent like an old man's. The investigation into the land claims took 3 weeks. During that time, more stories came out about the Brennans' business deals gone wrong, families destroyed, lives ruined. Public opinion turned. The territorial governor, facing pressure from newspapers across the West, ordered a full audit of Harold Brennan's holdings. The 30-day eviction deadline came and went. No one showed up to enforce it. By spring, the investigation had concluded. Marcus Brennan was found guilty of fraud and fled to California. Harold Brennan lost his seat on the territorial council. The land claim against Wade's property was thrown out, declared fraudulent. But the victory felt hollow. Wade had his land, but his barn was still ashes. His horses were still dead. And Thomas was still buried in the cold ground. He was standing by Thomas's grave one morning when Mera came up behind him. I brought the sapling, she said. The apple tree you promised. Together they planted it next to Thomas's headstone. It was small and fragile, barely more than a stick with a few branches, but it was alive, and it would grow. He would have liked this, Mera said softly, watching it bloom every spring. Phoenix will too. When he's older, we'll tell him about Thomas, about his brother who only lived 3 days, but mattered anyway. Mera looked at him with tears in her eyes. His brother, you mean that? Of course I do. Thomas is part of this family. Wade knelt and packed soil around the sapling's roots. And so are you. Not just because of a piece of paper, but because... He stopped searching for words. Because what? Mera's voice was barely a whisper. Wade stood and faced her. Because somewhere along the way this stopped being about survival and started being about... He took a breath. About caring. About wanting you here not because Phoenix needs milk or I need help, but because the cabin feels empty when you're not in it. Because I listen for your footsteps. Because when I think about the future, you're in it. Mera's hand went to her mouth. Wade, I'm not asking you to love me. I know that's not what this was supposed to be. But I need you to know you're not just the woman who helps me. You're... He reached for her hand. "You're the woman who saved us both, me and Phoenix. And if you'll have us really have us, I'd like to make this real. Not practical, real." Tears spilled down Mera's cheeks. "Everyone I love dies, Wade. I told you that. I can't. Everyone dies eventually. Mera, that's just life. But that doesn't mean we stop loving. It means we love harder while we can." He pulled her close. "I love you. And I think maybe you love us too. Phoenix and me." "I do," Mera whispered. "God help me, I do. I tried not to. I tried to keep my distance, to stay practical and cold and safe. But you, both of you broke through anyway." Wade kissed her, then soft and careful, like she might disappear if he held her too tight. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, her whole body shaking. When they pulled apart, Phoenix was crying from the porch where they'd left him. They both laughed. "He's got good timing," Wade said. "Terrible timing." But Mera was smiling, really smiling for the first time since Wade had known her. "We should probably go get him." Probably. They walked back to the cabin together, hand in hand. Mera picked up Phoenix and settled him on her hip, and he stopped crying, immediately content just to be held. That night they didn't sleep in separate spaces. Wade gave up the rocking chair, and Mera gave up sleeping alone, and they lay together in the bed that had been Clara's, holding each other while Phoenix slept in his cradle nearby. "I'm still scared," Mera whispered in the darkness. "Of losing you, of losing him, of everything falling apart again." "Me too." Wade pressed his lips to her forehead. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone." "That doesn't make sense." "No. But it's true anyway." Mera laughed softly. Then she kissed him again, and for a while they didn't talk at all. The barn took all summer to rebuild. Wade worked on it whenever he could, and Mera helped, and sometimes Phoenix sat in his basket nearby watching his parents build something out of nothing. Neighbors started coming around tentatively at first, then more openly. Margaret Henderson brought a pie and an apology. The Sullivans offered to help with the heavy timbers. Even Sheriff Dawson showed up one Saturday and worked until sunset without saying much beyond, "Seemed like the right thing to do." By autumn, the barn was finished. Not as large as the old one, but solid and straight and theirs. Wade bought 2 new horses with money from selling cattle. Mera planted a garden and preserved vegetables for winter. Phoenix grew fat and happy, laughing at everything, reaching for both of them with equal enthusiasm. On the first anniversary of Clara's death, Wade took Phoenix to her grave behind the barn. He told his son about his first mother, about how brave she'd been, how much she'd loved him, how she'd given everything she had to bring him into the world. "She'd be happy you have Mera," Wade said to the small headstone. "She'd be glad you have someone who loves you the way she would have. And I think she'd understand. That love doesn't replace love. It just makes room for more." Phoenix babbled something that might have been agreement. That night, Wade found Mera standing outside looking up at the stars. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stood beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. How different life is now from a year ago. How I thought I'd die alone in that cabin." She leaned against him. "How wrong I was about almost everything." "Not everything. You were right that everyone you love dies someday. You just forgot that someday isn't today. And if it is, if tomorrow something happens, then we'll have had today. And that's more than a lot of people get." Wade turned her to face him. "Stop waiting for disaster, Mera. Stop waiting for permission to be happy. We've earned this, both of us." "Have we?" "Yes." He said it firmly, believing it. "We've survived things that should have destroyed us. We've fought when it would have been easier to give up. We've built a life out of ashes and grief and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. If that doesn't earn us some happiness, then nothing does." Mera smiled, and this time it reached all the way to her eyes. "You're right. You're absolutely right. Can I get that in writing? She laughed and kissed him. Phoenix, watching from the window, banged on the glass and laughed too. Winter came again as it always did, but this time the cabin was warm. The barn was full of hay and horses. The cellar was stocked with food. And the three of them, Wade, Mera, and Phoenix, sat by the fire at night, telling stories and making plans and building something that looked a lot like a future. Sometimes Wade thought about Clara. Sometimes Mera cried for Thomas. Sometimes they both woke in the night afraid that morning would bring fresh disaster. But they woke together. And they faced each new day together. And slowly, the fear loosened its grip. The apple tree by Thomas's grave bloomed the next spring, just a few small flowers, but beautiful. Phoenix was walking by then, and he toddled over to touch the petals with sticky fingers, while Mera and Wade watched. "Look at that," Wade said softly. "New life growing where we buried the dead." "That's what we do, isn't it?" Mera took his hand. "We plant things in places that hurt. We keep growing. We keep blooming even when it seems impossible." "We do." Wade pulled her close, one arm around her and the other scooping up Phoenix. "And we keep each other alive. That's what matters, not the land or the barn or what people say about us. Just us. This family we built out of nothing but need and hope, and the stubborn belief that we deserve to survive." Mera looked at him, then at Phoenix, then at the apple tree growing strong beside Thomas's grave. "We did more than survive, Wade. We lived. Really lived. And we'll keep living for as long as we're given." "Together," Wade said. It wasn't a question. "Together," Mera agreed. And it was a promise. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of apple blossoms and fresh earth. Phoenix laughed and reached for the tree, for the sky, for everything the world had to offer. And Wade and Mera stood there holding their son between them, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole by refusing to face the darkness alone. They'd lost everything, survived everything, and built something beautiful from the ruins. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough, it was everything that mattered.